Welcome to Paranormal Pages. Let's get straight into the true scary stories. Story 1. The door that wasn't there. From the moment I stepped into my new home, I knew something was off. The house, a dilapidated Victorian relic, had a charm that was hard to resist. High ceilings, ornate woodwork, and a staircase that creaked with every step. It was everything I had ever wanted in a house, a perfect place to start anew after my recent divorce. But the moment the front door closed behind me, a chill ran down my spine, as if the house itself had exhaled a cold breath. Unpacking took longer than expected, each box revealing remnants of a life I was trying to forget. As the sun set, casting long shadows through the stained glass windows, I decided to explore the basement. The landlord, Mr. Harris, had mentioned it was large and perfect for storage. Descending the narrow, wooden steps, I was hit by the musty smell of damp earth and old stone. The basement was vast, a labyrinth of brick and mortar. My flashlight flickered over the walls, revealing strange, faded markings. It was then that I saw it, a door, partially hidden behind a stack of old crates. It was an odd sight. A heavy wooden door with iron fittings, completely out of place in the otherwise unfinished basement. My curiosity piqued, I approached it and tried the handle. Locked. The next morning, over a cup of lukewarm coffee, I decided to call Mr. Harris. "There's a door in the basement," I told him. "It's locked. Do you have a key?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "A door?" he asked, his voice tinged with confusion. "There's no door in the basement, just a blank wall." "But I saw it," I insisted. "It's right behind a stack of crates." "You can't miss it." Mr. Harris was adamant. "I've owned that house for 20 years. Trust me, there's no door down there." "Maybe you're mistaken." Doubt gnawed at me, but I couldn't shake the memory of the door. That night, I dreamed of it, standing ominously in the dark, waiting for me. The next day, determined to prove I wasn't imagining things, I returned to the basement. The door was still there, just as solid and real as I remembered. I tried the handle again, but it wouldn't budge. I decided to take a different approach. Grabbing a crowbar from my toolbox, I wedged it into the gap between the door and the frame. Sweat beaded on my forehead as I strained against the resistance. Suddenly, there was a loud snap, and the door creaked open. A foul, damp smell wafted out, and my flashlight beam struggled to penetrate the darkness beyond. Peering inside, I could make out stone steps descending into the blackness. The air was cold, unnaturally so, and I hesitated. A sense of dread washed over me, but curiosity pushed me forward. Slowly, I began my descent, each step echoing ominously in the confined space. The further I went, the colder it became, and I could hear faint whispers, like the rustling of leaves in the wind. At the bottom of the stairs, the narrow corridor opened into a small chamber. The walls were lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and tattered books. In the center of the room was a large, stone altar, covered in strange symbols. As I stepped closer, the whispers grew louder, almost urgent. I reached out to touch one of the books when the door above slammed shut, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me as I fumbled for my flashlight. When I finally turned it on, the beam flickered weakly, illuminating the unsettling scene. My heart pounded in my chest, and I knew I had to get out. But as I turned to leave, I heard a voice, clear and cold, whispering my name from the shadows. "Hey, subscribe for more scary stories." My legs felt like lead as I stumbled up the stone steps, the voice from the shadows still echoing in my ears. When I reached the top, I threw my weight against the door, desperate to escape the oppressive darkness. It resisted for a moment before giving way, and I burst into the basement, gasping for air. I slammed the door shut behind me, leaning against it as I tried to steady my trembling hands. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dark chamber, heard the whispers. By morning, my resolve was hardened. I needed answers. With determination, I drove to the local library, hoping to find some history on the house. The librarian, an elderly woman with kind eyes, was more than willing to help. The old Victorian on Elm Street, she mused, flipping through a thick ledger. Yes, I remember. It has quite a history. Built in the late 1800s by a wealthy industrialist, Jonathan Rookwood. Strange fellow, kept to himself mostly. There were rumors, of course. People said he was involved in dark rituals. My heart raced. Dark rituals? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She nodded. Yes, but nothing was ever proven. He disappeared without a trace one winter. The house was abandoned for years before it was sold. Back at the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls seemed to close in on me, and every creak and groan of the old structure set my nerves on edge. I knew I had to go back to the basement, despite the fear that gnawed at me. There were too many unanswered questions. Armed with a flashlight and a camera, I returned to the hidden chamber. The door creaked open, and I descended the stone steps once more. The air was as cold as ever, and the whispers started again, growing louder with each step. The chamber was just as I had left it, with the stone altar and shelves of dusty artifacts. I began taking pictures, hoping to capture some evidence of what I was experiencing. As I focused on the altar, I noticed something I had missed before, a small, leather-bound journal, half hidden under a pile of rags. I picked it up, brushing off the dust. The cover was embossed with a name, Jonathan Rookwood. Flipping through the brittle pages, I found entries detailing strange experiments and rituals. Rookwood had been obsessed with the idea of eternal life, believing he could cheat death through dark magic. His last entry was particularly chilling. The ritual is almost complete. Tonight, I shall transcend this mortal coil. As I read, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The air around me seemed to thrum with energy. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me, and I fumbled with the flashlight, trying to get it to work. When the beam finally flickered back to life, I saw them, shadowy figures standing around the altar, their eyes glowing in the dark. They spoke in unison, their voices a chilling whisper that echoed off the stone walls. You should not have come here. This place is not for the living. Fear gripped me, but I couldn't move, couldn't tear my eyes away from the spectral forms. One of them stepped forward, and I recognized the face from old photographs, Jonathan Rookwood. His eyes bored into mine, and I felt a cold dread settle over me. You have opened the door, he said, his voice a hiss. Now you must face the consequences. The spectral figures closed in around me, their forms shifting and blending with the darkness. Jonathan Rookwood's hollow eyes seemed to pull me into an abyss. I struggled to break free from the paralysis of fear, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the edge of a step, and fell hard onto the cold stone floor. Rookwood's voice filled the chamber. You have trespassed where the living do not belong. The ritual must be completed, and you shall be the vessel. Desperation fueled my movements as I scrambled to my feet. I clutched the journal tightly, hoping it might offer some clue, some way out of this nightmare. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me like a storm. I turned to the altar, its symbols glowing faintly, pulsing with an eerie light. I needed to understand what Rookwood had been trying to accomplish. Flipping through the journal, I found a page detailing the final ritual. The instructions were cryptic, filled with arcane symbols and phrases in a language I couldn't decipher. But one thing was clear, Rookwood had intended to bind his soul to the house, to achieve a twisted form of immortality. The air grew colder, and the spectral figures began to chant. Their voices melded into a single, droning note that resonated deep within my bones. I knew I had to act quickly. Rookwood had been obsessed with the idea of eternal life, but perhaps there was a way to break the ritual, to sever the connection between him and the house. With shaking hands, I rifled through the artifacts on the shelves, searching for something that might help. Among the dusty jars and ancient tomes, I found a small, ornate dagger. Its blade was inscribed with the same symbols that adorned the altar. Instinctively, I knew this was the key. The chanting grew louder, more frantic, as if the spirits sensed my intent. I approached the altar, the dagger heavy in my hand. Rookwood's voice echoed in my mind, a cacophony of anger and fear. "You cannot stop us. We are eternal." Ignoring the voice, I plunged the dagger into the center of the altar. The glow intensified, the symbols flaring brightly before fading into darkness. A deafening scream filled the chamber as the spectral figures writhed and twisted, their forms dissolving into mist. Suddenly, the whispers ceased. The oppressive cold lifted, and I was alone in the dark chamber. My flashlight flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the stone walls. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The door at the top of the stairs was still ajar, a sliver of dim light piercing the darkness. As I made my way back up, I felt a strange sense of relief. The spirits were gone, their hold on the house broken. But as I reached the top step, a new sound stopped me in my tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible, a heartbeat, slow and steady, coming from within the walls. Panic surged through me as I realized the truth. The ritual had not been broken, only altered. Rookwood's soul was still bound to the house, and now, it was connected to me as well. The house had become a living entity, its heart beating in time with mine. I fled the basement, slamming the door behind me. My mind raced as I tried to think of what to do next. Leaving the house wasn't an option. I was tied to it now, bound by the same dark magic that had ensnared Rookwood. I needed to find a way to sever the connection, to free myself from the grip of the supernatural. As I paced the dimly lit hallway, a plan began to form. There had to be a way to reverse the ritual, to banish Rookwood's spirit once and for all. The journal held the answers, I was sure of it. But time was running out, and the house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, watching my every move. I knew I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, someone who understood the dark arts, someone who could guide me through the final steps. But as I reached for my phone to call Mr. Harris, the lights flickered, and a cold wind swept through the house. The front door creaked open, and a shadowy figure stood in the doorway. The shadowy figure stepped into the dim light of the hallway, revealing a gaunt, pale face beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He moved with a predatory grace, his eyes glinting with an unnatural light. My breath caught in my throat as I recognized him, Jonathan Rookwood, now fully manifest in the living world. "You cannot escape," he intoned, his voice a low growl. "We are bound, you and I. The house is alive, and so long as you remain within its walls, you shall never be free." Fear gripped me, but determination burned stronger. Clutching the journal, I stood my ground. "I'll find a way to break the connection," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I'll destroy you in this cursed house." Rookwood's lips curled into a sinister smile. "You misunderstand," he whispered, stepping closer. "The house is my body now, and you are its heart. Destroying it would mean destroying yourself." Desperation clawed at my thoughts, but I couldn't back down. I had to try, had to fight for my freedom. I flipped through the journal, searching for any hint, any clue that could help me. My fingers stopped on a page near the end, the ink faded but still legible. It described a counter-ritual, a way to sever the bond between spirit and structure. The ritual required two things, a sacrifice of blood and a symbol of life. Rookwood's presence grew oppressive, the air thickening with his malice. "You cannot win," he hissed. "The house will consume you." Ignoring his taunts, I ran to the kitchen, grabbing a knife. "Blood and life." The words echoed in my mind as I sliced my palm, letting the blood drip onto the journal. The pages absorbed the crimson droplets, the symbols glowing faintly. My heart pounded with fear and hope. With the journal in one hand and the knife in the other, I returned to the basement door. The house seemed to resist my movements, the walls closing in, the floorboards creaking underfoot. The heartbeat grew louder, a drumbeat of doom. I descended the steps, Rookwood's ghostly form following, his eyes burning with hatred. In the chamber, I approached the altar once more. The symbols glowed brighter, responding to my blood. I placed my hand on the stone, feeling its cold surface pulse with a life of its own. "This ends now," I whispered, lifting the knife. Rookwood's form shimmered, his voice rising in a furious wail. "No! You will not defy me!" Ignoring the spectral wails, I plunged the knife into the altar, the blade biting deep into the stone. The chamber trembled, the air crackling with energy. The symbols flared, burning with an intense light. I chanted the words from the journal, each syllable resonating with power. The house groaned, the walls shuddering as if in pain. Rookwood's form flickered, his screams echoing through the basement. The ground beneath me shook violently, and I feared the entire structure might collapse. But I continued, driven by a desperate need to be free. With a final, thunderous crack, the altar split in two. The symbols faded, the light dimming until only darkness remained. Rookwood's form dissolved, his screams fading into silence. The heartbeat stopped, and an eerie stillness settled over the chamber. Exhausted, I collapsed to the floor, the knife slipping from my grasp. I lay there for what felt like hours, my breath coming in ragged gasps. When I finally mustered the strength to stand, I climbed the stairs, each step feeling lighter than the last. The house, once oppressive and malevolent, seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. The front door was open, sunlight streaming in. I stepped outside, the warmth of the sun on my skin a stark contrast to the cold darkness of the basement. I knew I couldn't stay. The house, though no longer haunted, held too many dark memories. I had to leave, to start anew. As I walked away, I glanced back one last time. The house stood silent, its windows reflecting the morning light. The door to the basement was closed, locked forever. The nightmare was over. Or so I hoped. Yet, as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that some part of Rookwood still lingered, waiting for another soul to discover the door that wasn't there. Subscribe for more true scary stories. Story 2. Enigma of the Carved Symbol. I woke up to the sound of soft whispers, like a distant conversation just out of earshot. Disoriented, I blinked against the darkness, my eyes gradually adjusting to the faint glow emanating from the floor. There, in the center of my bedroom, was a strange symbol carved into the wood, surrounded by a circle of flickering candles that hadn't been there when I went to bed. My heart raced as I threw off the covers and sat up, my breath visible in the unnaturally cold air. The symbol was intricate, with interlocking lines and strange, almost runic characters. It looked ancient, like something out of an old grimoire. I shivered, not just from the cold, but from a growing sense of dread. How had this gotten here? Who had done this while I slept? I reached for my phone, only to find it dead despite being on the charger all night. The digital clock on my bedside table was also off. It was as if the room itself had been drained of power. I took a deep breath and tried to steady my nerves. "This is just a prank," I whispered to myself, but the words felt hollow. I slid out of bed and approached the symbol, the air growing colder with each step. The candles flickered more violently, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. I crouched down and ran my fingers over the carvings. They were deep and precise, too perfect to have been made in haste. As I traced the lines, a sudden gust of wind blew through the room, extinguishing the candles and plunging me into darkness. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and I could swear they were calling my name. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. There was no response, only the relentless whispering that seemed to seep into my very bones. Panicking, I groped for the flashlight I kept in the nightstand. Its beam sliced through the darkness, revealing that the symbol was now glowing faintly, emitting a sickly green light. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the rug. This was no ordinary prank. Something malevolent was at play here, something far beyond my understanding. Determined to find out more, I grabbed an old journal from my bookshelf, one I had inherited from my grandfather. He had been an occult enthusiast, always scribbling down notes on various supernatural phenomena. Flipping through the pages, I searched for any mention of the symbol now etched into my floor. As I turned the pages, the whispers intensified, as if they were reacting to my actions. There, on a dog-eared page, was a sketch of the very same symbol. My grandfather had labeled it the Mark of the Watchers. According to his notes, it was a sign used by ancient cults to summon and communicate with otherworldly entities. The implications were chilling. Had someone or something been trying to reach out to me? And if so, why? I had to get out of there. The air was growing unbearably cold, and the sense of an unseen presence pressing down on me was overwhelming. I stuffed the journal into my backpack and rushed for the door, only to find it locked from the outside. My heart pounded in my chest as I yanked on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder still, converging into a cacophony of voices that drowned out my thoughts. "Let me out!" I screamed, pounding on the door. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls vibrating with an unseen force. Just as I thought I would lose my mind, the door flew open with a deafening crash. I stumbled into the hallway, gasping for breath. As I turned back to look at my room, the symbol's glow faded, and the whispers ceased, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. But the chill remained, a lingering reminder that whatever had entered my room was far from gone. I knew then that this was just the beginning, that the symbol was a gateway to something far more sinister. And as I stood there, trembling in the darkened hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The house seemed different, shadows lurking in every corner, and the faintest of noises making me jump. At dawn, I called my best friend, Sarah. She had always been the rational one, the skeptic who didn't believe in anything she couldn't see or touch. I needed her pragmatism now more than ever. Sarah arrived within the hour, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. I led her to my room, showing her the carved symbol and the melted candles. "This isn't a joke, Sarah. I woke up to find this in my room." And the whispers, they were real. She examined the symbol, her brow furrowed. "This is intense," she admitted. "Have you called the police?" I shook my head. "And tell them what? That a ghost carved a symbol into my floor? They'd think I'm crazy." Sarah nodded, conceding the point. "Okay, let's think this through. You said your grandfather had something similar in his journal?" I retrieved the journal and showed her the page. She read it silently, her face growing paler with each line. "The mark of the Watchers," she whispered. "This is heavy stuff, Nick. If your grandfather believed in this, maybe there's something to it." We spent the day researching. Every website and book we could find on the symbol and ancient cults offered more questions than answers. The mark of the Watchers seemed to be associated with summoning rituals, but the specifics were elusive, shrouded in mystery and half-truths. It was almost as if the information was intentionally obscured. By evening, frustration was setting in. "We need help," Sarah said. "Someone who knows about this kind of thing. Do you know any of your grandfather's old friends? Maybe someone from his occult circles?" I thought about it. My grandfather had been reclusive in his later years, but I remembered a name. Professor Elias Gray, an old colleague who still taught at the local university. I managed to find his number and gave him a call. When I explained the situation, he agreed to meet us at his office. Professor Gray was an imposing figure, with a stern expression softened only by his genuine curiosity. "I've known your grandfather for many years," he said, after we had shown him the journal. He was a brilliant man, deeply immersed in the study of the supernatural. We described the symbol and the events of the previous night. Gray's eyes widened slightly, but he remained composed. "The mark of the Watchers," he said thoughtfully. "It is indeed a powerful symbol, believed to be a conduit to another realm. Those who use it often seek to communicate with entities from beyond our world." "Why would someone carve it in my room?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gray hesitated. "It's possible they were trying to establish a connection. The fact that you experienced whispers suggests an attempt at communication, albeit a crude one. But this isn't something to be taken lightly. The forces at play here can be dangerous." His words sent a chill down my spine. "What do we do?" "You need to break the connection," Gray said firmly. "Destroy the symbol, cleanse the room. It's not a guaranteed solution, but it's a start. And you must be careful. If this is the work of someone deliberately summoning these entities, they won't stop easily. Back home, Sarah and I prepared to follow Gray's advice. Armed with salt, sage, and a hammer, we approached the symbol with trepidation. I hesitated, but Sarah's presence gave me the courage to proceed. I scattered salt around the room, then lit the sage, waving it over the symbol as Gray had instructed. The air seemed to crackle with tension. Finally, I took the hammer and struck the center of the carving. The floor splintered, the symbol disrupted. For a moment, it felt like the room exhaled, a pressure lifting. But then, the temperature plummeted, and a low, guttural growl filled the air. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic than before. "Nick, we need to go!" Sarah shouted, grabbing my arm. We ran from the room, the growl following us down the hallway. As we slammed the front door behind us, I knew we had only just begun to understand the true nature of the forces we were dealing with. The entity was angered, and it was coming for us. Sarah and I didn't go back to my house that night. Instead, we checked into a motel, hoping to find some semblance of safety. The whispers, the growl, it all felt too real, too immediate. As we sat in the dimly lit room, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open. "We need a plan," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We can't keep running. We need to find out who did this and why." I nodded, clutching my grandfather's journal. Gray said it was an attempt at communication. But why me? What did they want? Sarah tapped her chin thoughtfully. "Maybe it's not just about you. Maybe it's something your grandfather was involved in. Did he have any enemies? Anyone who might want revenge or power?" I shrugged, feeling helpless. "I don't know. He was secretive about his work. There could be 100 reasons." The next morning, we returned to the university to speak with Professor Gray again. He greeted us with a somber expression, sensing the urgency of our visit. "I did some digging of my own," he said, "and I found something that might explain why this is happening now." He led us to his office, where an old book lay open on his desk. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with archaic symbols and handwritten notes. "This is a grimoire," he explained. "A book of spells and rituals. Your grandfather and I studied it extensively. One entry stands out, a summoning ritual that matches the mark of the Watchers." Gray pointed to a passage. "It mentions a powerful entity, one that grants knowledge and power to those who summon it. But the price is steep. It requires a blood sacrifice, and the connection, once established, is nearly impossible to sever." I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. "So, someone is trying to gain power by summoning this entity? And they're using me as a conduit?" Gray nodded. "It's possible. The timing of your grandfather's death and the appearance of the symbol can't be a coincidence. They might be using his connection to you to strengthen their hold. We need to find out who," Sarah said, her jaw set. "And we need to stop them." Gray handed me a small vial of liquid. "This is holy water, blessed by a priest. Use it to cleanse the symbol completely. It might help weaken the connection. But be warned, whoever is behind this won't give up easily." Armed with the holy water and a renewed sense of purpose, we headed back to my house. The place felt different, more oppressive. As if it resented our intrusion. I steeled myself and entered my room, where the remnants of the symbol still marred the floor. With Sarah by my side, I poured the holy water over the carvings, reciting a cleansing prayer Gray had given us. The room seemed to resist, the air growing colder, the whispers returning with a vengeance. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. Suddenly, the floorboards began to creak and shift. The symbol glowed one last time before fading completely. The room went silent, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. "We did it," Sarah said, relief in her voice. "For now, at least." But as we turned to leave, a figure appeared in the doorway. A man, tall and gaunt, with a sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. "You meddled where you shouldn't have," he hissed. "The entity demands its due." Before we could react, the man lunged at us, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. Sarah screamed, and I fought to keep him at bay, the vial of holy water our only weapon. In the struggle, I smashed the vial against his face. He recoiled, screaming in agony as his skin sizzled and burned. "Go!" I shouted at Sarah, pushing her towards the door. We ran down the hallway, the man's screams echoing behind us. But as we reached the front door, it slammed shut, trapping us inside. The whispers returned, louder than ever, and the temperature plummeted. I knew then that we were trapped, and the entity would stop at nothing to claim us. The true horror had just begun, and there was no escape from the haunted grip of the unknown force that pursued us. Sarah and I were trapped in my house, the air thick with the malevolent presence that had been awakened. The man who had attacked us lay motionless in the hallway, his face still smoldering from the holy water. But I knew it wasn't over. The entity, whatever it was, wanted us, and it wouldn't stop until it had us. "We need to find another way out," Sarah said, her voice trembling but determined. "There has to be a way." We moved cautiously through the house, every creak of the floorboards making my heart race. The shadows seemed to shift and move on their own, and the whispers followed us, relentless and insistent. It felt like the house itself was alive, a living entity bent on our destruction. In the kitchen, we found a large window that overlooked the backyard. It was our best chance. I grabbed a chair and smashed the glass, the sound echoing through the house like a gunshot. We scrambled through the broken window, cutting our hands on the shards, but we didn't care. We were outside, away from the suffocating darkness of the house. But as we stood in the backyard, catching our breath, a cold wind swept through the air, and the whispers followed us, growing louder. The entity wasn't confined to the house, it was everywhere. Sarah grabbed my arm, her eyes wide with terror. "We need to end this, Nick. We need to find out who summoned this thing and stop them." I nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "Let's go back to Gray. He might know what to do." We ran to the car and sped towards the university, the oppressive presence lingering at the edges of our perception. When we arrived, Professor Gray was waiting for us, his face grim. "I feared this might happen," he said. "The entity has been awakened, and it will not rest until it has what it wants. How do we stop it?" I demanded. Gray sighed. "The ritual must be completed, but on our terms. We need to summon the entity fully and then banish it. It will be dangerous, but it's the only way." He led us to a basement beneath the university, a place lined with old books and arcane symbols. It felt ancient and powerful, a place where the veil between worlds was thin. Gray set up the ritual, placing candles and drawing symbols on the floor. "We will need a conduit," he said. "Someone to channel the entity so we can banish it." "I'll do it," I said without hesitation. "This started with me. I'll end it." Gray nodded, respecting my decision. He handed me a small, ornate dagger. "You must cut your palm and let the blood drip onto the symbol. It will call the entity. Be strong, Nick. This will be difficult." I took a deep breath and did as he instructed, wincing as the blade sliced into my skin. Blood dripped onto the symbol, and the candles flickered violently. The air grew colder, and the whispers became a deafening roar. The entity was coming. Suddenly, a vortex of darkness formed in the center of the room, and a figure began to emerge, its form shifting and flickering like a nightmare. It was the entity, and it was more terrifying than I could have imagined. Its eyes glowed with an unnatural light, and its presence filled the room with an overwhelming sense of dread. Gray began to chant, his voice steady and strong. Sarah joined in, her voice adding to the power of the ritual. I stood in the center, feeling the entity's gaze upon me, its whispers filling my mind with promises of power and terror. I fought to keep my focus, knowing that any lapse would doom us all. The entity reached out, its tendrils of darkness wrapping around me. I screamed, feeling my very soul being pulled towards it. But Gray's chant grew louder, more insistent, and I felt a surge of power flow through me. I gripped the dagger tightly and plunged it into the heart of the symbol. The entity let out a deafening scream, and the vortex of darkness began to collapse in on itself. The tendrils loosened, and the whispers faded. The room shook violently, and then, with a final burst of light, the entity was gone. I collapsed to the floor, exhausted but alive. Sarah and Gray rushed to my side, their faces filled with relief. "We did it," Gray said, helping me to my feet. "The entity is banished. It cannot harm you anymore." But as we left the basement, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air felt different, lighter, but there was a lingering sense of unease. I looked at Sarah and saw the same doubt in her eyes. The entity was gone, but the symbol on my floor had opened a door to something far greater. And I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning of our battle against the unknown. The end. Subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.